Okay, here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do record this and put it on YouTube and send you all a link. Chapter 1, Introduction to Fluid Power. We're going to see how it all started, okay? Okay, these are the objectives. I'll just let you read them yourself. Okay, what is a fluid power system? Well, it's a prime mover, right? This would be like the electric motor or something like that, and it turns a pump. And I don't like this. It doesn't pressurize a fluid. It creates flow. Pressure comes from resistance to flow. A pump creates flow. If you understand that, you can fix a lot of problems, okay? Pump creates flow. Pressure comes from resistance to the flow. Remember that. And it transmits to an actuator. An actuator is the thing that actually moves and performs the work. If you look at this, we got some symbols here. We got a control valve, and that's a hydraulic symbol for a control valve. You got a pump. You got a directional control valve. You got a hydraulic cylinder, right? That little thing on the bottom is the tank, zero pressure. And we'll talk about this later on. But these are the hydraulic symbols. Notice that when we're talking hydraulics, though, all the little arrows and things are black. That means it's hydraulic. If we start talking about pneumatic, they're not colored in. Okay, again, I'm just going to reiterate. Pumps create flow, not pressure. They create flow. Okay, fluid power systems are in two classifications, hydraulics and pneumatics. By fluid, they mean that they can move around pretty good, the medium. Hydraulics, it happens to be hydraulic oil generally. Pneumatics, we're talking about air. Pneumatics. Okay, we're going to compare the hydraulics versus pneumatic. Why would you pick one over the other? First thing is operating pressure. If you look at hydraulic oil, it's generally what we call incompressible. So you add pressure, it really doesn't change size or shape. If you compress air, it gets smaller, right? You can actually change the volume. Accuracy of the hydraulic movement, because it's incompressible, hydraulics are a lot more accurate than pneumatics. Actuator speed. The speed of a pressure wave is actually related to the density. So actually air is a lot faster responding. So if you need it to respond instantly, you want to probably use pneumatics. But you can get pretty fast if you want with hydraulics, because again, that's a function of flow. So you get bigger pumps with hydraulics generally. Pneumatics are a lot lighter because you're talking about air versus oil, and pneumatics are a lot cheaper. I can't add much to this. Again, hydraulic systems are accurate. They're incompressible. They have high pressure. We used to have 10,000 psi when I was in aviation, but they're slow. But they are strong, right? They're like an ox compared to a thoroughbred of pneumatics. Just to reiterate what we just said, pneumatic systems, they're not as accurate because they're compressible, but they're faster. And they're lighter in weight because you're talking about air instead of oil. If you look at that handout I gave you on the last class, you'll see some advantages of hydraulics over electric or other things. Again, you get more force. Torque, it's basically a rotational application of force. They're fast. And you can control the direction of the actuators. It's hard to change the direction of the electric motor. Again, the natural movement of air and water, this is like a logging mill picture of it. Basically, that's hydrodynamics. We're using the mechanical properties of the fluid. We're going to focus on hydraulics, which will focus on the pressure. You can see there's really no pressure being applied to this fluid. Okay, some industries, of course, still use it. In fact, if you look at renewable energy, it is a hydrodynamic event. The windmills, tidal forces, that's all hydrodynamics. If you look at the earliest industries in the United States, a lot of them were built on waterfalls. And that was because it could use the hydrodynamic features of the water to propel the machinery. Windmills, just look at Holland, they were huge on that. That's what kept them dry. They were actually below sea level. Windmills would pump the water out. But very simple way to apply power. And this was done in the 1700s and 1800s primarily. The early wind and water mills didn't have very much power output, 3 to 5 horsepower. My little car, this little Avio, it has about 80 horsepower, so you can tell how small these things were. And here's this statement: historians feel that many early machines devices were developed using empirical knowledge. In other words, trial and error rather than scientific theory. Duh. Archimedes, who was a really, really smart guy, was sitting there in Syracuse in off of Italy. He's in there playing with a piece of wood. He noticed that it floated. And he said, "Oh, what makes this thing float?" And he says, "Oh, I see. This is the density. It's less dense. So if you displace that amount of fluid and replace it with a piece of wood, it weighs less if you got the same volume." He says that's what makes things float. And this has been, they've known about this thing for 3rd century BC. I mean, that's 2,300 years we've known this. But then you got the scientists, Pascal, Boyle, Charles Reynolds, you can add Bernoulli, Toscanini. There's a bunch of it. Provide information to serve theoretical basis for fluid and scientific industrial applications. And here's the deal, when they find out that some of these principles, they don't do anything with them for the first couple hundred years. When they first found out that you could create a force, nobody did anything with it until Brahma came around 200 years after Pascal and did something. About early 1700s, it still amazes me that we're talking almost 300 years. Newcomer made his steam engine, which didn't work so good, but then all came James Watt, and all of a sudden he got this thing going, and he started rocking and rolling. So all of a sudden, we had this power available to us. And this is considered the start of the Industrial Revolution, the Watt steam engine. Have you ever tried to use a garden hose or something, and it's got a leak in it? And so by the time you get the water, you're just getting a small part of it, not all of it. But man, if you're going to try to control pressure, you got to have good seals. So if you have a nice round piston and these rubber seals, you can get the pressure up. And the more pressure you have, the more you can do work with it. And again, remember, pumps create flow, but it takes flow and pressure to do any work. They started doing these things, they call them power units, right? And when prime mover, that's the electric bit, the pump, and then the reservoir. And you've got those three things, and then you can do it, right? So what we would do is we take these power units, and they'd be self-contained, and you can move it to whatever machine you want, right? So as soon as the fluid power became flexible, and you weren't stuck with one machine, all of a sudden this thing just took off. Here's some examples of power units, right? Self-contained power units. If you look at that handout that I gave you earlier, which one of these power units is the best, do you think, as far as performance? And why? You can generate a lot of force with hydraulics. If you look at that truck up there, right? That's being held up there with hydraulics. You can pick up bridges. You can do almost anything. Elevators work on it. Hydraulics have a lot of force. Look around you. See if you can't see some hydraulics. It's in the mobile equipment, construction. I mentioned elevators, hydraulic jacks. There's a lot of things that use fluid power. This is an irrigation system. And what you see then, look at all those sprinkler heads pop up. That's because of the pressure. The flow actually comes not, the prime mover is actually gravity, right? If it's a municipal water system. And that creates the flow, and then you get the pressure. I also want you to look at the heights of these things. You can tell the one nearest us is the first in line. As you go down, you get less and less flow, less and less pressure. You can see the flow gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It's some quick review questions. I'll just let you read that. If you have a question, email me. Okay, let me know, or come to my office and we'll talk about it. Another question. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Just look at these, pause it, and read the question, see if you can answer it.